Peter Steinberger, the creator of ClawdBot, which just changed its name to MaltBot, and then as of this morning is now called OpenClaw, I believe, just went on the Pragmatic Engineer podcast and gave a banger podcast about how he built ClawdBot and then his thoughts on kind of the future of AI development and development in general. I highly recommend that you go over to the Pragmatic Engineer channel, which is a great channel, and watch that full podcast if you're into knowing how great engineers build stuff. There are 3 takeaways from that podcast that directly influence how I'm building out the rest of the Build Anything app, and I thought I'd share those with you so you can weave those into your development process. The first one is parallel agent coding loops. So he talked about this, and he actually used 5 to 10 agents while he's building out ClawdBot, which is not a surprise from somebody who's building out something like ClawdBot or OpenClaw. But here's one way that you can think of doing this, and there's 3 distinct different types of agents that you can use. The first agent is a builder agent. The second agent is like a pair programming agent that checks the code for the first agent. And the third agent is like an alignment agent or a synthesis agent. The first thing you want to do is break your app into different sections that don't really overlap with each other. So like maybe one section is your onboarding flow for users, and another section is your settings management, and another section is maybe you have an inbox app that you're building. It's important that you separate these out because it just makes it cleaner and you don't have one agent that's trying to write code that's overlapping with the code from another agent. So the more you can separate these out, the easier it'll be for you. And what you want to do is take a prompt and assign agent 1 to a specific area. So if you're setting up a settings area, you have one builder bot, so A1 here, and their job is to build whatever your prompt says. And then it's going to build that, and then your second little buddy helper agent is going to come back and check the code of that agent. So what you're going to do is you're going to fire off the prompt, get that agent to start coding, and then you're going to move on to your second agent. This is in a separate part of the app. If this was working on settings, say this one's working on the onboarding flow, and you're going to have your second app start working on the onboarding flow, and then have your second buddy helper start reviewing the code for this. So it looks like this. You trigger this one, it starts working. You come and you give this one a prompt, and it starts working. You come and give this one a prompt, and it starts working. You go all the way around the loop. And by the time you're done with the last loop, this first agent is completed. Since you've been monitoring it the whole time, you've had the code checked, and you go through an entire loop like this where they all get to finish their respective builds. And in between each one of those, you have an alignment agent look at the code and see if the code from any of those individual agents are going to screw anything up when all of that code comes together. You can do this in more than one app too. So if you're building several apps at a time, like many of us are, you can set up your different apps where you're building one app with 2 or 3 agents, the second app with 2 or 3 agents, the third app with 2 or 3 agents, and you build out 3 loops like this. So you're building 3 apps at a time. You'll need your caffeine, and there's a lot of context switching, but with the agents doing most of the work, it kind of frees you up to think about the larger system type things and how you're prompting and how your app actually serves the people and what problems it solves, because you're just having these agents go around and build things in loops. The second thing he talked about is how he does pull requests. So he's working on this application, and there's a lot of people putting in different pull requests, which if you don't know what that is, it's just there's different people, or it could be different agents working on an application, and they all have different pieces of code. And at some point in time, all that code needs to come back into the main code base. And to do that, they open up these things called pull requests, which is pretty much just saying, hey, I've got this piece of code. Can we add it to the app? Now, the way this has always been done in the past is you open up a pull request and you go through and you review things line by line. And then if it passes, you stack that on top of your app, and then you add it to your app. Peter says he's getting away from this model, and he really talks a lot about something called weaving your app or sculpting your app. And let me tell you a little about this because I think it's a great idea. He doesn't care about pull requests that much anymore. What he's really saying is he cares about how a agent or a person arrived at the conclusion. So the way I took what he said was he sees a pull request almost as like a suggestion. Here's a way you could build the app, and he will take those pull requests. And what he actually wants to see is not just the code that somebody is submitting, but he wants to see the prompt that generated that code and how they arrived at their conclusion. And then what he will do is actually look at the code with an agent and then kind of like cherry pick bits and pieces of that code and have a discussion about how that code might influence the main branch, and then bring in different parts of the code, or maybe even rewrite it completely and take that as a suggestion and say, okay, now I'm going to build this out in main. I think this is a great idea because I can envision a time in the future, and I'm actually going to try to play around with this a little bit more this weekend if I have time, is to where instead of having one pull request, maybe you open up 3 or 4 branches off your main line and you have agents build things with slightly different prompts that are just kind of loose prompts where you're not being real explicit about how to build it. Just get 3 or 4 different agents familiar with your code base. You can run the init statement and make sure you're pointing them to your claude.md file. And what you would do is have them all build something for the app, and then you would look at that code that they have, and instead of saying, okay, I'm going to go through and check it line by line, you have another agent that reviews all that code, considers the consequences of what it would take to bring it in, and then take only the best parts of that code and merge it into the main part of your app as, the official version of your application. You can do this already with tools like Claude, and I know that Cursor has a feature where you can have multiple versions of an agent's response. But I plan on using this a lot more and changing the way I think about pull requests. Because if I'm being honest, I hate doing pull requests. I'm a vibe coder at heart, and if it was up to me, I would just push everything on main and vibe code away, even if that's reckless and irresponsible at times. And the third thing you talked about was like sculpting versus waterfall. And I was really glad that he brought this up because as somebody who's been building software for a long time and has been deep in, waterfall and agile conversations and building software, the way we used to build software was we would write up a huge specification, then you would give that to a team of engineers and they would go implement it. And if you weren't right, you had this big long gap between when you actually built something and when it got released. And this causes all sorts of problems because if you're wrong, well, you've already spent tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars building some feature that's terrible. The reason I'm glad he mentioned this is because today I see a lot of people talking about specs and building up big elaborate specs. And it to me almost feels like the waterfall method is being brought back into AI development, which is the last thing we actually want. I know what I'm trying to do with my app right now is get completely away from building specs, and in the Build Anything app, I'm making it where you're just pretty much describing the spirit of a problem. And I know that sounds weird, but you're describing an app and you're just describing a problemscape, and that's the information that you're actually giving to the AI agents, and then you're working with them to come up with solutions. This is way more agile than even Agile was, and you get a lot more opinions. So instead of saying this is the answer to a problem, you're giving a bunch of context to all these agents in the Build Anything app, and what's actually happening is they're responding back to you in different ways, multiple ways you could solve a single problem instead of saying, here's the problem, here's how you're going to solve it, go build it. So this gives you way more degrees of freedom as a builder. Instead of thinking you're so smart that you can come up with like the best answer, you do the opposite of that and you say, I'm not really sure, let me try out 4 or 5 different answers. With as powerful as these coding agents are becoming, that's the way you can go. It doesn't matter if the code is perfect at first. You get to look at fully built out solutions from 4 to 5, like senior developer, junior developer type of agents. It sounds like Peter has been through some of the same type of waterfall methodology in the past and definitely feels that pain. And I was really glad to see that an engineering leader like him is bringing stuff like this to the forefront, because a lot of people are getting into coding now that have not been building applications for the past 10 years and have not done that with a corporation. So you'll get these people that are doing great with vibe coding, even if it's not the best code ever, they're getting into coding, which is what we all want. But then you'll see all these people that are saying, we'll build these huge specs and specify everything, then just give this to the agent. And I think that's the wrong way to build software, and that will not be the way that we're doing it most effectively in the future. But that's all for today. Make sure you go over and watch the full podcast at the Pragmatic Engineer channel. It was great. It influenced the way I'm building out the Build Anything app. And if you want to test out the Build Anything app or get on the beta test list, go to ericbefore.com. And you also get the Conductor framework there for free when you sign up. You can use that in any code base you want. But that's all for today. Thank you for watching.